A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Survival of No Limits. What I got to talk about today is actually something else that goes into some more uncharted territory, because the thing is, we aren't exactly familiar on what's safe and what's dangerous. Basically speaking, episode 30. Yeah, 30 days worth of this stuff. Although realistically, it's been exactly 60 days since the series first started, so 2 months, pretty much. Which is quite some time, actually. The fact that I've already talked about 29 other subjects, it's incredible how time has passed. But now, time for number 30. And, well, going back to this, plant consumption is what's on the mind next. Because what does this have to do with survival? Well, simply put, if you're familiar with plant consumption at all, based on today's generation, then you might be more familiar with the consumption of fruits, vegetables, and other related plant products. A plant product diet is seemingly the best way to go. Anything that can grow on a tree, or bush, or shrub, or any other type of, well, vegetation, then it's considered okay to eat. But there are other cases where that would not be the case. There are, in fact, lots of plant species out there that have dangerous consequences for most health. There are, in fact, the popular poison ivy, oak, and sumac, which of course eventually led into the DC villain Poison Ivy, and then of course there were thousands of other plant species, some of which we're already familiar with, including foxglove, hemlock, oleander, and dozens of others. But then of course there comes the rare genus of plants. Castor oil plants, manchineel trees, and plenty of others that seem to cross a lot of people's paths. Whether they're from the local area where you live, or they're from out of state, out of country, out of continent, out of hemisphere, or otherwise, it seems to be quite a mystery. What kind of plants out there could you, in fact, allow to have within your body without them killing you? Well, of course, as I've said, most vegetables and fruits, plant products of those sorts, have been found to be edible thousands of years ago. And as a result, we were able to consume these without any issues. But then, of course, comes some that are, in fact, pretty treacherous in a way. If you're very familiar with a green potato, for example, then, well, simply put, those things have been able to kill people. Solanine toxin, which is common in green potatoes, have been known to accidentally end up inside people's stomachs and therefore cause poisoning in most victims. There was a case where German soldiers have had green potato consumption and as a result ended up suffering from solanine poisoning in regards. But then of course there are many other plant species out there that we also know are very benign, including mushrooms, apples, cherries, taro plants. Oh man, lots of people are already familiar with the fact that some plants out there, regardless of what species they are, where they originate, what kind of plant they might be, as a whole, it is known by many that there are lots of them that seem like they're going to be fine, but they aren't. In reality, there are tons of mushrooms out there that happen to be edible, but others out there have been proven to either give you a psychedelic sort of feed, as well as a very toxic, sufferable type of event. Yeah, of course, this is a pretty grim situation for most people. But above all that, we do have, in fact, the mushrooms that we generally eat. The ink caps, the brown mushrooms, the white ones, and many more out there. Apples and cherries Of course, we're probably familiar with the fact that the seeds of an apple or the pits of the cherries, we usually spit them out. But in case they end up getting swallowed by accident, then there of course are the cases of cyanide poisoning. Cyanide does naturally grow in some vegetation, which of course poses a threat to people's health. But of course, we already know to avoid the seeds and the pits at all costs, regardless of the plants they are from. Otherwise, there still are the many, many plants out there that we've known throughout history that are in fact dangerous at any time. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're worse, sometimes they're deadly, sometimes they're just a little bit dangerous. Either way, it still is best to avoid most of those types of plants out there that you could simply pick out of a forest to try and make your own spring mix. Lots of people have tried these sort of dangerous stunts, and I sure know my share of picking different plants, but I knew better than to just eat them and be fine with that. I've avoided fern, I've avoided sage, I've avoided the consumption of a lot of plants out there because even though many of them are harmless, they still do taste pretty gross. Many of them do. So of course it's probably what I would just be best to avoid them in any way if you can. But otherwise, I'd say that that's pretty much it for this point in the series, because eating plants sure is a common feat that we have in times where we need to survive. And just have to keep a clean eye out there for those that seem like they're harmless, but yet they may not be. So, of course, picking plants out in the wild that might be edible may not always be the best solution to your everlasting hunger. Well, that's pretty much it for this point in the series, but if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.